Thanks for your company here on Richo and Reith. I suppose I can reasonably call it at this point.
Call it whatever you like, mate.
I'll call it that. And in the studio with us is Senator Sam Dastyari. This bloke is a very irritating fellow because he beat my record. I was the youngest ever Secretary of the Labor Party. He was actually closer to his 26th birthday than I was when he got it.
Reminding you?
Yeah, I know. I mean, never lets me forget it. But it's very irritating to me. It's something. He's a source of constant irritation, therefore. But tonight it's about a few more serious things. Now, Senator Sam Dastyari has been the chair of a committee in the Senate that has done some remarkable things in recent times, some of which have been praised, some of which have been bucketed pretty heavily. Tonight I thought we'd go into a few of those. First off, I wanted to talk to you about this whole idea of naming and shaming tax dodgers. Now, Alan Jones, who's not here, I feel I should at least ask the question that he immediately raises. He says that companies like Chevron and others that come into this, in fact, sink billions upon billions of dollars into a project, and therefore they've got tax write-offs for years. So it might be a decade before they actually have to pay any tax. So how can you bucket them in the meantime when they're not paying it?
Okay, well, let's be clear what we're saying here on the naming and shaming. What we're saying is you have to have a lot more transparency about who isn't paying tax. And in a case like Chevron, where there is legitimate deductions that are being made, I don't have an issue with that. You're right. Something like Chevron's invested a huge amount of money. My issue with Chevron is the fact that there's serious questions about whether they've given themselves some fairly questionable loans at questionable rates to make their company appear less profitable than it is. Look, the big issue here is there a handful of, in particular, multinational companies that are taking Australian taxpayers for a ride? And I think the evidence from our committee is yes.
You're going to have plenty of evidence, because otherwise you're going to just get accused of business bashing, a sort of class war a la Wayne Swan, and he did spectacularly poorly.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that for you, mate. You know, because I was 32 once, you know, and I wasn't in the Senate.
I can't believe
I would have loved being a senator, you know, like Bronwyn Bishop. You know, you could be the next Bronwyn Bishop, because she used to go.
Kiss of death.
Well,
that's scathing.
Well, I pulled a stunt once, and somebody bucketed me in the AFR. I've never forgot it, and I never pulled a stunt, you know, ever since. And I'm all in favour of raising issues, and it's great fun when you're in opposition, and it's a great way to get your name up in the papers. But you've got to be able to substantiate in a real way in doing so. And so you want to run shaming and naming, okay, but not really okay, because we have laws in this country. And if you operate in accordance with the law, you should not be subject to being shamed.
Okay.
I think it's completely wrong.
That's the issue.
The question is, are they operating within the law?
This is where I disagree.
Well, if people are not operating within the law, then the tax office and whoever else should do something about it. Let's face it, just to make one finished point, this is my opening point, which is Labor was in government for 6 years, and now once they're in opposition, they're playing games in the Senate. So be careful, because you've got. I don't mind telling you, mate, you've got a good career, but you don't want to.
Overreach.
You don't want to overreach. You don't want people to think that this is the guy who's just, madly keen to get a run in the press and not actually a person of real substance.
Okay. All right. Let's let him answer.
I think that warrants a bit of that. What we're saying here, let's be clear what we're saying. We're saying that we need to have a lot more transparency in what's going on in the tax system. The real issue here is whether or not there are companies that are creating artificial structures for the sole intent of minimising their tax liability. I think a lot more transparency will achieve two things. I think, firstly, it will in time result in some better laws, and secondly, I think giving some of that power back to consumers is not a bad thing. What's going on here and what's going on, it's not just an Australian problem, it is an international problem, but what's going on here is it's been a rort. And it's ripping off Australian taxpayers. And I think a bit more transparency. What we're saying...
why are so many in Ireland? Why are so many tax structures set up in Ireland? Why are so many set up in the Netherlands? Now, it may be that our laws allow it. That doesn't mean our laws are right.
Exactly.
Yes, but it doesn't justify going after people who are acting in accordance with the law. And
you just changed the law.
Yeah,
that's what
but you just made
changing the law for transparency.
But you did just say, you said, oh well, these people are sort of beating the system, and therefore after we should change the law. Well, I don't think it should be shaming and naming.
Well, he's not going to name anyone yet. He's not going to do that.
No, I'm saying the law should be changed to have more transparency.
We should be able to do it in any
So what's the transparency required for then, actually?
I think the transparency is required to actually give the consumers a lot more power and give the consumers a lot more information. I think the fact that, look, the famous example is the Starbucks example in the UK, where Starbucks hadn't paid tax for 5 years and it actually took a community and a public campaign to get them to change their behaviour. I think giving consumers and the people a lot more information. There is a thirst for information when it comes to this tax space at the moment. People want to know what's going on. They want to know what's happening. And I think giving people information... let's be clear. I'm not saying on its own that's the solution. I'm saying that's part of the solution. I think we also have to have a better resourced ATO. In the next couple of months, we're going to talk a lot more about transfer pricing and about debt shifting.
Yeah, I was going to raise transfer pricing because it seems to me that there are plenty of issues here where you could have naming and shaming, and the amount of tax you pay is but one.
Well, I'm just asking you the question. Why do you want transparency if people are abiding by the law as it is today?
Well, I think the law needs to be changed.
Right.
And I think transparency...
I don't mind you. So
why do you need naming and shaming?
Well, I think a lot more transparent... Well, firstly, let's be clear.
I don't even know what your answer is. I mean, I'll tell you why I think you should have it, because it'll make people actually comply with laws. At the moment, the real job of the clever accountants and lawyers is to find your way around them, to find those little alleyways
that's always been the case.
Yeah, but I mean, at
Under
some point, mate, this is not a political point. I'm not bagging the Liberal Party. It's got nothing to do with who's in government.
Say you were.
Both sides have let it go. The time has come to say to these companies, we're not letting it go anymore. By the way, the Yanks are doing it. The POMs are doing it. There's no reason in the world why we can't.
And the Europeans are doing a really good job in this kind of area of transparency. They're moving towards it. Because the reality is, a lot of these companies do care about their reputations. They do actually care about market share.
Yeah, but I don't think they should be shamed if they've abided by the law.
They are getting away. What they're getting, and what I'm saying is the law should actually be changed so there's more transparency.
Well, see, I don't have a problem with that. You put up a proposition, a bill, and
I've got 18
forward.
different recommendations in the report that's come out a month ago.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I think you're a very busy fellow, and that's all great. And I encourage you to keep up the pressure. But I think you've got to get you've got to get all the ducks lined up in the right way.
Can I give you an example?
That's the point I want to make.
I want to make one example because I think this actually illustrates it. Because we talk about transfer pricing and it all kind of... I'm going to give you a simple example which I just want people at home to kind of understand. When we're saying this, what do we mean? Take an iPad. An iPad retails for about $700 depending on what model you get. When you buy an iPad, you're buying an iPad from Apple Australia, from down at the Apple Store. Mm-hmm. What most people don't realise is what they've actually done, Apple Australia has bought that iPad through a whole bunch of different intermediaries, ultimately from Apple Ireland. And the goal of Apple Ireland is to sell that iPad to Apple Australia for as close to $700 as possible, so that the actual profit being made is as little as possible. So the profit being made in this high tax jurisdiction is, as minimal as possible. Now, the irony of the whole thing is, at the end of the day, we all know the iPad's actually made in China, gets built there, and gets sent straight from the Chinese factory to the Apple Store in Sydney, but somehow this transaction took place in Ireland.
There's a paper transaction that doesn't match the physical. I think that's what he's saying.
And this is what we've got to get.
The fact is, the world today, is a world where things are built here, the IP is somewhere else because that's where all the experts are, and then in Russia there's...
Yeah, but the Yanks are after Apple as well.
The question needs to be...
it is a much more complex situation than what you're making for.
No.
You're trying to make a point, you say to the consumer, mate, the consumer wouldn't have the vaguest idea, and it's no wonder because the tax system is incredibly...
Well, that's a separate debate whether or not we have too complex a tax system.
It's incredibly complex. We could go on
a problem here.
It's a very complex system, and just
of course it is,
running a sort of...
You've got to, at some point, we can't keep hiding this. The Yanks are concerned about a number of their companies, including Apple, because we're not the only ones looking at this. The reality is, if I build an iPad for $100 or whatever it is in China, and I sell it for $700 here, and it never goes near Ireland, but apparently I've sold it to Ireland, and sold it to us, etc. It just doesn't look right. Now, a bit of transparency into that transaction. That's what he's saying. Why can't we all have a look at that transaction and see if it's right?
Well, mate, we're the last people who should be trying to calculate how this works. And the truth is that in respect of iPads, there's a lot of IP, isn't there? A lot of the value is not the actual physical making of an iPad at all. all. It's the intellectual capacity that goes with
Peter,
it, which is where the money is. And
if
that's
in
not
fact-
in Australia.
you're
is
right.
it?
The question is this.
there's a
therefore,
massive profit margin. Let's just say Apple are making $400 in every one of them, and we're getting taxed on 20. You've got, and it's being sold here. You've got to say there's something wrong, haven't you? I mean, couldn't you
why
admit
did it
that?
be-
Why
how
didn't
legitimate a
Labor in
transaction
6
is this?
years? We've had iPads for a few years now. Why didn't they do something about
Okay,
it?
can I answer
Why?
that? No.
Because when you go to the tax office people, they'll say, "Well,
It's too hard.
Well,
What
no,
they
it's
say
not
is it's too hard. That's
It's
what they
very
say.
complex.
They say it's too hard.
It's very complex.
They say it's too hard.
Exactly right.
And
And
so-
Labor in government, and again, I'm not here to make the political point. Labor in government did pass 3 big pieces of legislation in this space. This is a cat and mouse game. It's we're never going to have the perfect set of tax laws. Every couple of years, you are going to have to be constantly updating them. I think everything that Joe Hockey has said to date on this issue has been fantastic. I don't think in some cases his action has matched his rhetoric, but his rhetoric's been good. I think the working that we're doing at an international level for the base erosion and profit system is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I think there's more we can do unilaterally here in Australia that isn't going to risk the international project, and I think transparency is part of that.
A couple of years ago, can I we move on because I think we've covered it. I think
Yeah, we've given it
you're
pretty
happy. You've had your say. Now, I wanted to raise this question of credit card interest rates because, as some of you watching may know, I raised this issue, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago